Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Before you proceed, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel and recommend this channel to your friends and fellow aspirants. Also, should you wish to get in touch with me regarding your IAS preparation, I would be happy to help. The link to my Facebook account is mentioned in the video description. Now let's get started with the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper, beginning with a news item on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of The Hindu relevant for GS paper 3 as well as GS paper 2. In the UPA era, the year was 2004, an advisory body was constituted called National Advisory Council. This body was headed by Mrs. Sonia Gandhi. This body had people from different walks of life. People like former IAS officer Aruna Roy, economist John Drays, academicians, activists like Harsh Mandar, Madhav Gadgil, so on and so forth. But this advisory body was also criticized. It was criticized on the ground that it has now become a super cabinet. And because of this, it has undermined the importance of Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. It was argued that this extra constitutional entity is taking all the important decisions on behalf of the government and therefore undermining the significance and importance of the institution of Prime Minister and his Council of Ministers. But nevertheless, this National Advisory Council played a very important role in formulating some of the key legislations in this country. For example, right to information, right to education, National Food Security Act, all these important and critical pieces of legislation, they are a gift of this National Advisory Council. Also, MGNREGA, Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act, which was enacted by the Indian Parliament in the year 2006. What was the objective of this law? The objective was, let's provide livelihood to those who are living in the rural India. That means if there are people in rural India who are looking for jobs, we will provide them at least 100 days of work. And we will pay them for that. And if we are not in a position to provide them 100 days of work, we will provide them unemployment allowance. What was the objective? The objective was not only to provide 100 days of work to people in rural India, but the aim was to give a sense of dignity to the individuals in rural India, because we are not giving them arms, but we are giving them money because of the work that they do. The aim was also to create assets. That means asset creation was an important objective of MGNREGA. Assets such as roads, ponds, wells, canals, so on and so forth. And this MGNREGA was the most ambitious program for poverty alleviation in the world, to eradicate poverty in the rural India. But now what has happened? Government to peg MGNREGA wages to inflation in a bid to hike incomes. Yesterday in our The Hindu newspaper analysis, we discussed an important column that was mentioned in yesterday's newspaper. The column was related to 5 trillion economy. In that discussion, we raised an important issue that the problem with Indian economy right now is that there is a slump in the demand. There is a slump in the aggregate demand. And the government must address this slump. The government must address this declining aggregate demand. And this step has been taken keeping in mind that let's try and kickstart rural demand. Because if money available with the people in rural India is less, how can they pay for goods and services? That means the demand for goods and services in the rural India is declining because people have less money available in their hands. And how can we ensure that more money is made available to at least the people in rural India? Is by linking MGNREGA wages to the inflation. And now as the inflation will rise, so will the wages for the MGNREGA workers. But even then, there are two important issues. Let's discuss both these issues one by one. Issue number one is that the national average wage of a MGNREGA worker is 178.44 per day, which is way less than 375 per day, which is the minimum wage recommended by Labour Ministry panel. Earlier this year, Labour Ministry panel recommended a minimum wage of 375 rupees per day. Right now, the wage per day for a MGNREGA worker is only 178.44. Now what the government is trying to do? The government is trying to revise this wage keeping in mind the inflation. But for that, which inflation measurement index do we use? We use CPI, agricultural laborers. That means Consumer Price Index for agricultural laborers. This is the index which determines this MGNREGA wage. But the problem is this CPI-AL has not been updated in the last 3 decades. The last time it was updated was in the year 1986-87. So if MGNREGA wages are to be pegged with inflation, but to determine MGNREGA wages, we look into CPI-AL, which has not been updated in the last 3 decades, then what is the point? Now what the government has said, the government said in the first week of September that we are on track to update this CPI-AL as well. That's issue number one. Issue number two is that how do we calculate this CPI-AL? Let's say, for example, there are 299 items mentioned in this index. What is the retail price of all these 299 items? That means if you go to a shop, you buy this basket of 299 items, what is the amount of money that you have to pay to the retailer? That is how this CPI-AL is determined, is measured. But the point is, today in rural India, people do not only pay for food. People also pay for health. People also pay for education. People also pay for transportation costs. That means if the expenditure on health is increasing, on education is increasing, on transport it is increasing, but more than 2/3 of the items that are mentioned in this CPI-AL basket deals with food items, that means ultimately the inflation that will be projected would not reflect the reality. The real inflation can only be judged if more weightage is given to the amount of money people spend on health, education and transportation, so that accurately we can determine the level of inflation in a society. And based on the rising levels of inflation, the MGNREGA wages can be hiked accordingly. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another news article on page number 1 of the Delhi edition of the Hindu, relevant for GS paper 2. All the 6 MLAs of Bahujan Samajwadi Party, they have joined Congress in Rajasthan. But will these 6 MLAs be disqualified under anti-defection law? No. Why? Because under anti-defection law, if an individual MLA or an MP is resigning from his political party, joining another political party, then this MLA or MP shall be disqualified under anti-defection law. But if there is a group defection, if 2/3 or more members of a political party, they resign from their political party, join another political party, then these 2/3 legislators shall not be disqualified under anti-defection law. That means anti-defection law allows the group merger, allows 2/3 or more than 2/3 of the members of a political party to voluntarily resign and join another political party. And since in case of Rajasthan, all the 6 MLAs of BSP, they have joined the Congress, that means they shall not be disqualified under anti-defection law. What is this anti-defection law? In great detail, we already have a video lecture available on our YouTube channel. Please go through that video lecture. Everything related to anti-defection law would become clear to you. But one more important thing here. Anti-defection law as a law has failed. It has failed to curb political defections in this country. This we have witnessed in Sikkim, this we have witnessed in Goa, this we have witnessed in Karnataka and many other places. This is where a serious reform is required. This 2/3 merger should be disallowed. That means this 2/3 merger which is currently allowed under anti-defection law, this should be done away with. If you are not happy with your political party, you resign from your party, you resign from the legislature, then go back before the people of your constituency. Go back and contest the election again. And if people vote for you again, that means they are happy with your defection. They have no problems whatsoever. Because do you know what the problem is? It is difficult to split a big party which has, let's say, 100 MPs or 100 MLAs. It's difficult to split such a big political party. Why? Because the amount of money that is required to bribe these MLAs would be huge. But in smaller states, in states where a political party has fewer MLAs, it is very easy for any political party to bribe these 10, 15, 20 MLAs and ultimately weaken democracy in India. This is something that should not be allowed. That means anti-defection law should be amended so that this two-third merger is also disallowed. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another important article on page number 5, relevant for your prelims, related to Gharial. Under IUCN list, Gharial has been categorized as critically endangered. What are the conservation issues? Number one, dams are constructed, barrages are constructed. The result is that the natural habitat of these gharials is altered. Because of these dams and barrages, the quality, the quantity of water that is available is also getting affected. And ultimately, there is a loss of habitat for gharial. That is why it is critically endangered. There is another problem. Fishing nets, for example. Gharial has a long rostrum. If you look at the picture here, this is rostrum. You would see the head is prolonged. And this head gets entangled in these fishing nets and the head gets chopped. That also leads to reduction in the number of gharials, and ultimately that is why gharial is critically endangered. Third important conservation issue, sand mining. Illegal sand mining, for example in Son River, a petitioner told the National Green Tribunal that illegal sand mining is worth 2 crore per day taking place in the Son River. This affects the gharial and forces gharial to migrate to other areas. Fourth important conservation issue is mining. Mining activity destroys the nesting sites of gharial. Nesting sites get destroyed because of mining. That means eggs get destroyed due to the mining activity. All these are very important conservation issues. That is why now NGT is seeking a report on steps taken for gharial conservation. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at another newspaper article on page number 12. Let's first discuss terror, says External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar. But there is an important statement that is perhaps not mentioned in today's The Hindu newspaper. But that is the front page news in Indian Express. What is that important statement? Something spectacular, something important has been said by External Affairs Minister Mr. S Jaishankar. There is a 1994 resolution of Indian Parliament which says that Pakistan occupied Kashmir is also an integral part of India. But governments after government since 1994, they have only paid lip service to this resolution. That means it was argued by many experts that government of India is okay with line of control becoming a de facto border. What is this line of control? You would know when Pakistan invaded Jammu and Kashmir in 1947, then there was a full-blown war between India and Pakistan on Jammu and Kashmir. Some parts of Kashmir were occupied by Pakistan. That is what we call Pakistan occupied Kashmir. And then the government of India approached the United Nations. United Nations called for a ceasefire. And that is why this line which separates Indian Kashmir from Pakistan occupied Kashmir, this line is not called as border or international border, but it is called as line of control. Successive governments many analysts argue, were happy if this LOC is converted into a de facto border. That means this part of Kashmir will remain with India, that part of Kashmir will remain with Pakistan. Let's have peace and security in this region. But now a significant statement has been made by External Affairs Minister S Jaishankar, wherein he says that sometime in the future, we would want territorial sovereignty on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. We want territorial claim on Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. This is a significant statement which reflects a new stance taken by the Modi government. After the abrogation of the special status of Jammu and Kashmir, now it becomes clear from the statement made by the Foreign Affairs Minister that the next objective of the government would be to retrieve Pakistan-occupied Kashmir from Pakistan. That means to give implementation to this 1994 resolution of the Indian Parliament, which says that Pakistan-occupied Kashmir is also an integral part of India. That is something very important, and that is what is required from this newspaper article. Now let's look at some of the editorials and columns from today's newspaper, beginning with an important column on the Yemen conflict. For that, this is the map. This is where Yemen is, surrounded by Oman, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Sudan, Iraq, Iran. These are important neighborhood countries which play an important role in the conflict in Yemen. If you look at Yemen can be an important statement in your map-based question for your prelims, is at the southwest corner of Arabian Peninsula. Now important thing here is that we have north part or the northern part of Yemen, and then we have the southern part of Yemen. This northern part of Yemen, it has oil reserves. This southern part of Yemen is mostly desert. I'll tell you why we are discussing this. Northern part, mostly Shia dominated. Southern part, Sunni dominated. That is why this northern part comes under the influence of Iran, which is Shia dominated, and this southern part comes under the influence of Saudi Arabia, which is a Sunni dominated kingdom. Yemen is one of the poorer states in this entire neighborhood. This sounds surprising considering the neighboring countries are rich enough. But what is this Yemen conflict? This Yemen conflict can be traced back to 1930s. When the head of Yemen, what he did, he ceded some of the parts of northern Yemen to Saudi Arabia. Obviously, it was resented by the local population, which is Shia dominated. Then what happened? In 1960s, Saudis supported the fighters in north, and then there was a civil war. That means there was a civil war because of the Saudi intervention in 1960s. Afterwards, there were many other conflicts as well. But let's not get into all these conflicts, irrelevant from our examination point of view. Let's come to the recent past. The year was 2004. In the northern part, an insurgency was led by a cleric, a religious leader. His name was Hussein Badruddin al-Houthi. This cleric or religious leader was supported by Iran. And this religious leader launched a rebellion against the president of Yemen, Abdullah Saleh. Then what happened? Then came 2011. And in 2011, there was an Arab Spring. What is this Arab Spring? Series of protests broke out in Arabian countries. It first started with Tunisia here, where the government was overthrown. Basically, the Arab Spring were the series of protests against monarchy, because most of these Arab countries, they are kingdoms, they are monarchies, there is no democracy. This Arab Spring was also against the human rights violations committed by the successive governments in the Arabian countries. Then this Arab Spring spread to Libya, where Colonel Gaddafi was also captured and then killed. It also then spread to Egypt, where the pro-Western, pro-American government led by Hosni Mubarak was ousted, where millions of people were stationed at Tahrir Square in Egypt, and ultimately democracy was restored in Egypt. the dictator, as he was called, the president Hosni Mubarak, was ousted. Then this Arab Spring also spread to Yemen. When it spread to Yemen, ultimately the President Saleh, he was replaced by his deputy Mansour Hadi. Important to note here, Mr. Saleh was assassinated in 2017. Now what's the important point here? Since the government was taken over by Mr. Hadi, the Houthis rebelled against Mr. Hadi. Houthis were supported by Iran, were provided arms and ammunition and weapons by Iran, and ultimately what happened? Hadi had to flee, had to escape to Saudi Arabia, where currently he heads a government in exile. Then came something called Operation Decisive Storm. What is this Operation Decisive Storm? Sunni countries on one side and Shia Iran on the other side, supported sometimes by Russia as well. Sunni bloc led by Saudi, UAE, Egypt, Pakistan did not participate, and that is one reason why the Gulf countries today are not sympathetic to Pakistan, because Pakistan did not support this bloc against the Shia bloc of Iran. Later on, UAE withdrew from this group and it was complicated later on. In short, what is happening today in Yemen, it's a humanitarian crisis where we have two blocs, one led by Iran, the other led by Saudi Arabia, and they both want to have an influence in Yemen. But at the same time, this is where the terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda, such as Islamic State, they are taking advantage of this situation, and these two organizations become potential threat to the world peace as well. According to United Nations, Yemen is currently in the grip of world's worst humanitarian catastrophe with more than 11,000 deaths. 3 million people have been displaced. But why is it relevant for India? It is relevant for India because number one, look at the location of Yemen. This is where Bab al-Mandeb is. And if you look at this Bab al-Mandeb, it connects Arabian Sea to the Red Sea and then onto the Suez Canal. And it's an important shipment route even for the oil that is coming to India. That is why this conflict in Yemen has an important significance for India as well. The sooner this conflict ends, the better it is for the energy security of India. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Because if you recall on Saturday, Houthis launched drone attacks on crude oil facilities in Saudi Arabia, which has led to the increase, a sharp increase in the crude oil prices in the world. That is what this editorial also talks about. Fire to fuel. India must brace for the impact of oil supply cuts after these drone attacks on Saudi Arabia. And it also talks about something called asymmetric warfare. Houthis, although they are supported by Iran, although they have weapons and ammunition, but Houthis are a no match to Saudi Arabia in terms of military tactics, in terms of intelligence, in terms of ammunition. But now these drones, they are part of asymmetric warfare where Houthis can use these drones, and these drones can travel 1600 kilometers and then launch attack on the oil functionaries in Saudi Arabia. This can also be a potential challenge to India as well. What if tomorrow in this asymmetric warfare, the drones are used by Pakistani ISI and the military establishment, and attacks are launched on our key installations, on our key energy, business and economic interests? That is why the world as well as India will have to be careful about the use of drones in this asymmetric warfare. Now let's look at another important editorial on page number 9, Deadly Spread. And it talks about measles. Measles is basically an infection caused by virus, and it's a highly infectious disease. Can be an important statement for your prelims examination. There has been a 30% increase in measles cases worldwide in the year 2018. And now World Health Organization, what it has said, the biggest threat today is vaccine hesitancy. That means people refuse or are reluctant to vaccinate themselves despite the fact that we have vaccines available which can prevent the spread of measles. And the curious case is that there is a sharp increase in the spread of measles even in the European Union. Even in Europe, people are hesitant, people are reluctant to opt for this vaccine. And vaccine hesitancy is one of the biggest threats to the global health according to World Health Organization. Although it is not mentioned here, but let me tell you something. Where can we find the best lesson from? And we can find it from Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka has become free of this disease. That too at a time when there is a surge in the measles case even in Europe. But how did Sri Lanka manage all of this? And what are the lessons for the world as well as for India? But first, how can we declare a country free from measles? We can declare a country as free from measles if there is no reported transmission of this virus for 3 years. That means if there is no reported transmission of this measles virus for 3 years, that means we can declare that country as measles free. And since 2016, Sri Lanka has been declared as measles free. Why? Because of successful implementation of the vaccination program. There are 2 doses of vaccination required to prevent measles. One, let's say when the child completes 9 months or 12 months, that is when the first dose of this vaccine is given. Second, when the child completes 2 years or 3 years, that's when another dose of this vaccine is provided. And that vaccine is what we call MMR vaccine, measles, mumps, and rubella. This vaccine. In other countries, this first dose is successful. Even in Europe, this first dose is successful. That means the agencies have been successful in administering this first dose. But the second dose is where they falter. And in Western countries, including Europe, the coverage is only 67%. That means only 67% of the children are vaccinated. But so far as Sri Lanka is concerned, in both these doses, in both these phases, the coverage is 95%. That means so far as Sri Lanka is concerned, their immunization program has worked quite well. This is a lesson for India. This is the lesson for European countries. This is the lesson for the world, how to tackle this disease called measles. Now let's look at another newspaper column on page number 10. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in July announced that by the year 2024, all rural households in this country, what they would get piped water. Water would be provided to them for drinking purposes in a piped manner, that too under a program called Jal Jeevan Mission. But the writer, Mr. Vikram Soni, is very critical of this mission. Why? He says that this entire exercise is futile. Why the entire exercise is futile? Because this piped water, where is it going to come from? It's going to come from rivers, lakes, or even groundwater. That means what we have to do under Jal Jeevan Mission, we have to dig our earth, we have to dig the groundwater, we have to source water from rivers and lakes, and then through pipes provide water connectivity to people in the rural India. But rivers and lakes are polluted. Even groundwater is polluted. Ultimately, what will happen? Even if piped water is provided to people in rural India, but this water would not be fit for consumption. When the water is not fit for consumption, then what is the alternative? The alternative is to employ RO devices, reverse osmosis devices at home, water purifiers at home, and this RO water is very expensive. But Mr. Vikram Soni is not only criticizing Jal Jeevan Mission, on top of that, he is providing a solution as well. And there are 2 solutions provided under this article. Solution number 1, let's say for example, this is a flood plain. During monsoon, when the monsoon water is overflowing, what we can do, this overflowing monsoon water can be stored along this floodplain. On this floodplain, we can plant organic food. We can also plant fruit forests. Because ultimately what will happen? Organic food, fruit forest, they do not consume much water. They do not demand more water. What will happen because of that? If organic food is cultivated here, fruit forests are developed here, ultimately this floodplain would act as an aquifer. And this aquifer will be a source of water to the people. And that's exactly how it is done in Delhi. For example, in Delhi, in Yamuna Pala floodplain scheme, which has been implemented by the Delhi government, which is the first project of such a kind anywhere in this country, these floodplains have been significantly and sufficiently used to store water in the form of ponds, and then this water is then supplied to different places of Delhi, and ultimately water is made available. Then there is another solution. What is the solution? Let's say, for example, this is a forest, and in this forest rain is falling, but this rain is unpolluted. Why? Because it is falling over a forest area. Then this rain, what it does, it falls on the forest and it gets in touch with the humus on the soil or the leaves, and ultimately what happens? It tries to enter the earth, and while entering into the earth, it also picks up nutrients. When it picks up nutrients, it finally settles in underground aquifer. Now, how do these aquifers look like? This is how an aquifer looks like. There are basically two types of aquifers. One is unconfined aquifer, then there is a confined aquifer. What is an unconfined aquifer? Unconfined aquifer receives water directly from the surface. But this confined aquifer, what it does, the water is trapped between two layers of the rock. And then we can suck this water, we can pump this water out, and then we can provide this water to the needy, we can provide this water to our population. This is the best mineral water that we can have. And the author says, where can we get this water from? Eastern Ghats, they can act as aquifers. Similarly, in Bengaluru's Bannerghatta forest area, we can have an aquifer. In Mumbai's Sanjay Gandhi National Park, we have underground forest aquifers that can supply natural mineral water for the entire population of Bengaluru as well as in Mumbai. Even in Aravallis, we can have natural aquifers. We can have these natural mineral water. And at the same time, we need to charge this water as well. If you look at 14th Finance Commission reference, wherein the President asked the Finance Commission, please also recommend how can we charge for these public utilities? How can we charge for water? That means we should not be pumping more water from these aquifers, and ultimately we will be depleting our water table. So to prevent the misuse of this water, we have to charge this water, and the author says we can charge anywhere between 2 to 3 rupees per litre. That is going to be a better solution for providing water facilities to people in India and not digging up of the wells. That means floodplains and forest aquifers, they can provide natural mineral water and unpolluted bulk water for our cities. That is what you need to understand from this newspaper article. Now let's look at some of the prelims and mains based question. Number 1. Due to improper, indiscriminate disposal of old and used computers or their parts, which of the following are released into the environment as e-waste? Beryllium, yes. Cadmium, yes. Chromium, yes. Heptachlor, no, it's an insecticide. Mercury, yes. Lead, yes. Plutonium, no, it's a radioactive substance. So 1, 2, 3, 5 and 6. B is the correct answer. Question number 2. Which of the following species have been categorized as critically endangered? Gharial, yes. Ganges river dolphin, no, it is only endangered. Black-necked crane, it is only endangered. Only 1 is the correct answer. Previous year's prelims based question 2019. Which of the following is not a Harappan site? Chandaro is, Kot Diji is, Sahogara is not, and Desalpur is. So C is the correct answer. Mains based question, write the answer in 250 words. India's water crisis is often attributed to lack of government planning, increased corporate privatization, industrial and human waste, and government corruption. Comment. Please write an answer to this question. That is it from our newspaper analysis for today. Thank you for being with us. Have a great day.